What's up everyone, welcome back to another video. On today's episode we're going to be taking a break from the S4 and working on the Evo. On one of the last videos we did dyno it, where it put down 326 all-wheel horsepower at 23 psi. And one of the things I noticed when looking at the logs was it was quite a bit rich at the higher RPMs. We were getting an AFR value of 10.5. So today we're going to be going through all the tools and kind of tips that you'll need to refine your tune on the street. And some of the tools we'll be using today include EcuFlash, EvoScan, MegaLogViewer, as well as VirtualDyno. So with all that out of the way, let's get started. So first things first, we're just going to go through the programs that we're going to be using, starting with EcuFlash. EcuFlash is the way that we're going to connect and write to the stock Evo ECU. We're mainly going to be working on our high octane ignition and fuel map. EcuFlash will read a ROM that corresponds to your year and model car. Basically, the ROM is an XML structure, so think of a huge table that has a list of maps with their corresponding memory addresses. You don't have to really know too much about that, but you do want to make sure you're getting the right ROM for your particular car. As you can see, there's already a good amount of maps available. However, if you are feeling adventurous, you can patch your ECU with something like Tephramod and get even cooler maps like two-step, anti-lag, all of that fun stuff. But for me, I'm just gonna stick to the basics. Now let's take a look at EvoScan. We'll be using this program to record logs from our ECU. There are a ton of parameters that you can log, but in general, I'll just do the essentials. I'll have my throttle position, RPM, 2-byte load, which I'll describe in a little bit, my external wideband, the AFR map, as well as our knock sum. Be sure you're always using engine RPM as well as TPS if you are planning to plot any of these logs on VirtualDyno. Those are pretty much the essentials to be able to generate a dyno. Next, we'll take a look at MegaLogViewer HD. This is what we're going to use to visualize our logs as well as step through them and see all of our parameters at any given moment in time. It's helpful to just scroll through a log file and see what everything is looking like. We could easily see if we're running lean or if we're encountering knock or anything like that. Another feature I like to use a lot is the histogram. This is basically where you can apply X, Y, and Z axis. So something like load versus RPM, and then what AFR value you hit. And it kind of generates an average as well as how many times you hit that particular cell. Finally, we'll look at VirtualDyno. This program basically allows you to estimate your car's power and torque from a given log. To make it accurate, I would say it's really important to dial in your car's parameters in terms of weight as well as tire size. It's also essential to use the same road. You're going to want to find a long, flat stretch of road that you could use over and over again. And that's just because you want to keep the road consistent, so you could say that your dyno results are changing because of the tune and not the road itself. Alright, so before we go out and log, one of the things I wanted to show you guys how to do is how to enable the 2-byte load mod. And the 2-byte load is basically a more accurate representation of the load that the ECU is calculated. And by enabling that, we basically will have access to logging it in EvoScan. So the first thing you want to do is just identify the ROM that you're working with. And then you're going to go to the ROM directory and you're going to actually edit the XML file. So it's a good idea now just to back it up and store it in a safe place. Alright, so now we're going to edit this ROM. We're going to be adding 2 new table definitions, and a definition is a set of properties that identify the type of table and what values it expects as well as the memory address. And these could be found in the 2-byte mod thread on evolutionm.net. We're adding the 2-byte load low and high bit, and after we're done adding these table definitions, what we're going to do is open the ROM back up in EcuFlash and populate the values for these 2 tables. As you can see, we have our 2 new tables under MISC, and we're just going to populate these values with those found in that thread I mentioned earlier. Alright, now we could finally go outside, get in the Evo, and put down an initial run with our current tune and see how much we put down on VirtualDyno. Once the car's warmed up, I'll go in third gear, start logging, and go from 2000 RPM to Redline. Alright, after we do a few polls, we're going to open up MegaLogViewer and analyze the runs. I'm displaying RPM, throttle position, knock sum, and our wideband air-fuel ratio. The first thing I'm looking for here is really any knock events, and Evos are notoriously noisy motors, so 1 to 2 random counts here and there isn't really much to be concerned about. Especially considering there's a lot of noise that could stem from suspension and vibrations and such. But when you do have repeated knock events, especially counts higher than 3, you do want to determine what's causing that. And generally it's probably because of over advanced ignition timing. Now I'll open up that run in VirtualDyno just to see what kind of power we're looking at, as well as our air-fuel ratios. Using the stock configuration, we're seeing a value of 314 all-wheel horsepower, which is super close to our 326 recorded on the Mustang dyno. As you can see from the AFR plot though, we are running super rich on the onset of boost and where our peak torque is, so we are going to want to aim for something like 12.5 around our peak torque, and then we're going to taper down to about 11.5 during high boost, and then Redline we're going to aim for about 11.2. Now on to making adjustments. I'll open up EcuFlash with the tune on the left side of my screen with the histogram on the right side, and I'm going to load the RPM on the y-axis, load on the x-axis, and the wideband read-in on the z-axis. This lets me see what the actual AFR was for a given load point, and I'll compare it with the tune and make adjustments as needed. Once I'm happy with my adjustments, I'll copy over my high octane fuel map to my low octane fuel map and richen up the mixture quite a bit on all the cells past 100 load. After we're done, we'll write this to the ECU and go out for another drive and take some more logs. Alright, so let's see how our last runs of the day are looking. From our histogram, we could see that our air-fuel ratio is looking a lot better. At peak torque, we are around 13 to 12.5, and then we're tapering down to 11.5 at peak boost, and then finally at Redline, we are heading towards 11.2 AFR. So I'm pretty happy with this. There's still some areas that need some smoothing and some work. Like when you first get into throttle, it's still a little bit rich. And then around 3,800 RPM, there's a little bit of a lean spot. Now we'll open up that log in VirtualDyno, and we see that our final number is 327 wheel horsepower, a gain of 13 horsepower from where we first started. So not too bad from just adjusting the fuel, adding a little bit more boost, and playing with the timing a little bit. Like you guys could probably tell, this is a very iterative process, so you will be going back and forth checking your logs, checking VirtualDyno, etc., until you really get as close to the mark as you want. All right, well, that's gonna do it for today's video. As you guys can tell, it has been a very iterative process, and you're just gonna be doing a lot of back and forth, which can be annoying to some people. Honestly, I kind of find it a little bit rewarding just because you could actually feel and see the results. Of course, with tuning, you do want to keep everything as consistent as possible, so I probably wouldn't go out and tune today just because it's cold and rainy, and when I started tuning, it was a little bit warmer and dry out. So you want to keep all of your conditions as consistent as possible. Hopefully you guys learned something new. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out.